Hello, Fighting for Vaccine Equity Learning Community members and others working on vaccine equity, and welcome to this afternoon's learning event. My name is Kristen Brown, and I am the Deputy Director for Group Learning. On behalf of our team at the Urban Institute, thanks for joining us. Today, we will explore the basics of advocacy. This is an event that has been in the works for some time, so we are very excited to host it today. Relationships built through advocacy and legislative awareness can be important for the maintenance of community-based organizations. Today, we will discuss what advocacy is, why it is important, who is an advocate, and how do we do it. We will also hear about a community organization, specifically an Atlanta church, who has engaged local legislators in their vaccination drive efforts. Before we go further, I'll do our typical quick review of how this session will work. You've all been muted upon entry to this session. There are a lot of us, so staying on mute unless you're speaking is key to keeping the discussion going without accidental interruptions. You do have the opportunity to speak your question rather than type it into the Q&A. It's your choice. If you want to speak your question, use the raise hand feature and we'll unmute you. If you want to type your question, use the Q&A tab to do this, and you can ask a question at any point during the session. The chat room feature is also open today, and we encourage you to chat amongst yourselves as you'd like. But please use good chat room etiquette. By this, I mean do not post questions for the speaker in the chat because we might not see them there. And though this probably goes without saying, please be civil to one another and to our speaker while chatting. We have begun offering live interpretation from English to Spanish during our events. If you would like to listen to the Spanish language channel, simply click on the globe icon in the Zoom taskbar at the bottom of your screen. Finally, as with all of our learning events, we will post the slides and a recording of this event on our community website and circulate them through the digest that go out through the CDC Managed Adult Vax Program listserv, which all program members should be a part of. If you are having technical difficulties at any point during the session, send an email to our community manager's inbox at vaxequitylearning@urban.org. We'll be watching the inbox and we'll try to help you as quickly as we can. And now it is my absolute pleasure to introduce our featured speakers. Taylor Tucker is the program manager and training and outreach at Health Equity Solutions. He received both his Bachelor of Social Work and Master of Social Work from the University of Connecticut with a concentration in policy practice. Taylor worked with the Nancy A. Humphreys Institute for Political Social Work, where he designed and implemented trainings focused on voter engagement, knowledge, and rights in supporting students' political advocacy efforts. He has also served in the U.S. Navy, where he worked as a shop manager and led multiple trainings that focused on working and supporting various sailor identities, job advancement knowledge, and overall health and well-being while deployed. Next, we have Pastor Wayne Mack, who is the lead pastor, along with his wife, of the Grace Place Atlanta Church of God by Faith. Pastor Mack holds a BA in Mass Communications with an emphasis in professional public relations from the University of South Florida and a Master's of Arts in Ministry from the Luther Rice University and Seminary. As an ordained pastor, he leads a thriving congregation of committed followers who love God and want more of him. Pastor Mack has served on the National Executive Administrative Advisory Board of his denomination, whereas he is responsible for the development of administrative policy, change management, and research and development of new ministries. Thank you so much to Mr. Tucker and Pastor Mack for taking the time to speak with us this afternoon. Mr. Tucker, I will hand things over to you now.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Kristen. And I want to make sure that everyone can hear me if there's any issues. Right before we started this, we talked about how Zoom truly can do what it feels like sometimes. And so I just want to make sure that everyone can hear me and hear me clearly. And so yes, for that introduction, my name is Taylor Tucker. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm the manager of training here at Health Equity Solutions. And today I have the absolute joy and pleasure to be here with you all today doing a mini workshop on Advocacy 101. Next slide, please. And so as I introduce myself, I would love if everyone could introduce themselves in the chat. So your name, your pronouns if you feel comfortable, your location, your role if applicable, and what you are most excited about learning in this session. And so I'm just going to give everyone a couple minutes just to settle in, introduce themselves in the chat again, name, pronouns if you feel comfortable, your location and your role, and what you are most excited about for learning in this session today. So it seems as though, is there any chance, I apologize, Zara, Kristen, is there any chance that we can get the chat turned on for some of these activities, or I just got a question about it, so I just wanted to double check.
Feel free to put it in the Q&A if you cannot get it into the chat. And that way we'll be able to see them there.
Awesome. Yeah, great. I can see some of the questions answered. So if people want to do that, that would be wonderful. And we do have one chat activity early on. And so I'm glad that we are doing this now. So thank you so much for that quick troubleshoot. And so I'm starting to see some introductions. Wonderful. Awesome. Hello, everyone. Hello. I like to always say hi and introduce myself and have you all introduce yourself just to get us into this space together. And so as they keep coming in, I will continue to say hello and welcome and thank you for being here. But as we do that, I am going to start off. Next slide, please. And so I just really want to also introduce Health Equity Solutions, the organization that I have the joy to work with and work for. So Health Equity Solutions is a nonprofit that is located in Hartford, Connecticut. So here our vision is for every Connecticut resident to obtain optimal health regardless of race, ethnicity, or socioeconomic status. And we work to achieve that vision by promoting policies, programs, and practices that result in equitable healthcare access, delivery, and health outcomes for all people in Connecticut. Next slide, please. And as mentioned, I am part and manager of the training and outreach team here at Health Equity Solutions. And so we believe in the active dismantling of oppressive colonial systems, and that there needs to be a systematic response to address inequity and racism as it pertains to health outcomes for all of Connecticut's residents. So we will create purposeful learning opportunities that push people to conceptualize and implement tangible solutions that are equitable, anti-racist, and sustainable. And so we find that reading our creed is important for two major reasons. First, it gives everyone that we're sharing a co-learning space with some background and framework on what informs our training models and how we show up into space. And secondly, it serves as a really clear, important, transparent tool for accountability. So it's really just to make sure that we're also upholding everything that we say we are, and that you all can make sure that we are as well. Next slide, please. And so this was a chat, but we are going to shift right on the fly. So what we're going to do is we're going to do what's called a think, write, speak. So we are going to give everyone a quick 30 seconds to think about this question. So the question is, what word comes to mind when you think of advocacy? And so how this is going to work is I'm going to give everyone 30 seconds to think about it, 45 seconds to write. And then we would normally do a share out, but I'm going to hold this and have everyone think about their questions, think about kind of how they relate to advocacy, and then also have it be, instead of the share, be a question building activity if you have any questions for Pastor Mac and I as we go in to our workshop today. And so I'm going to put 30 seconds on the clock right now for everyone just to think, to contemplate, no need to write, but just kind of brainstorm on this question. And that 30 seconds starts now. So what word comes to mind, or what phrase, emotion maybe, comes to mind when you think of advocacy? Awesome. And so we are going to shift to that 45 seconds of writing or typing, whatever feels best to you. And I also feel free, if there are anything that you would like to share, you can put it in the Q&A. If everyone feels comfortable with that, you are able to do that, and I can share some of the things that some of our members and participants have shared around what they're thinking. So we can also do that as well if it's not a question. So now 45 seconds to think and write about it. All right, so that is 45 seconds. And so I am seeing someone in the chat mentioned legislation and lobbyists. Absolutely. That absolutely comes to mind when I think of advocacy. I'm seeing activity. I love that. I love this conversation that's happening over here. And so again, also I want to acknowledge that as we move, feel free to keep putting things in the Q&A. Feel free to engage in that Q&A, and I will make sure to highlight it. We'll make sure to talk about it without the chat being live. So feel free to engage in that. And again, if you had any questions or wrote down anything, I'm really excited about hearing that in the Q&A. And so next slide, please. And so here we are. So we're talking about advocacy. And so, advocacy might feel as though there's been recent increases in the frequency of the word advocacy, whether that's in social media, it's on the news, it's in professional development, right? Like we're hearing it a lot. And so the most common comments or questions that we get asked or we get talked about are, what exactly is advocacy? What does it mean? And how do I do advocacy? And so advocacy is defined as supporting a process or a cause, a proposal, or policy. And so a couple people mentioned legislation, lobbyists, activity in the chat, and it's all of those things and more, right? Advocacy is an action word. It's the act or process of advocating for something and making your voice heard, whether individually or collectively on an issue that matters to you. Next slide, please. And so the word advocacy is so dynamic, and it doesn't mean just one thing. Rather, it means a number of things. And whatever form your advocacy takes, it's key to understand the what, the who, the how, the where, the when, and the why. And so we call this our 5 W's and our H for advocacy. What issues are you advocating for? Who will be impacted most by your advocacy? Who are you advocating alongside of? I know someone in the chat mentioned standing alongside someone. Exactly. Who are you advocating alongside with? What medium will you use? How will you advocate and where? And what is your why? Why is this issue important to you? It doesn't matter who you are, your education level, when or where you were born, or the reason why you care. You are an advocate if you've ever spoken up for yourself or for someone else. Next slide. And so we're going to start with our what, really naming this issue. And so as we begin to discuss the various steps of advocacy and how to successfully advocate, the very first step is to clearly define your issue. Defining your issue clearly allows for a broader understanding and transparent path to follow. And the clearer your issue is, the easier it is to educate others, to spread cohesive awareness and messaging, and to build kind of that cohesive goal that's easily understood by everyone. And that's especially talking about policymakers. And so I also want to remind everyone that advocacy for any need, regardless if they're individual or a community scale, is important. But it's always really the key is to start with a clearly defined issue that can help and build the structure and strength of your advocacy power. Next slide, please. And so now we're going to move on to our next H, our who. And so I really like to imagine this as the process of structuring and defining your who, as starting out really small and minute, kind of in that center, and then zooming out as you go. And so this is kind of what's going to connect the problem to the who, to the what we're focusing on. So when we start this who, this process, it's helpful to look at the immediate center and which individuals are most impacted. And then as you build your structure and build your goals, we take a small step back and we look at who else is affected and whether or not it may be your block in your neighborhood, for example, or an entire group of people at a specific elementary school. And then you can take another step back, and depending on how large your issue effect is, we can look at if your whole town, for example, needs more green space. Does your state need better roadway care? And is healthcare not accessible in this country? And so by taking smaller steps out and building our who, it really allows us to see how many people are affected, and it helps to build our advocacy power. And so I'd love to use this example where someone who utilizes the bus for the majority of their transportation notices that in the morning, it's extremely hot, especially here in the summer, and there's no shade, and that their specific bus stop does not have shelters, which forces them to wait outside for extended periods of time. And so due to the possible prolonged waiting outside in harsh weather, this individual develops health problems, or their already underlying health problems are exacerbated by that weather exposure. And so this then possibly makes them miss work due to an illness or the need for healthcare appointments, which they still have to wait at that bus stop in inclement weather for. And they miss out on possibly needed income, and we can see how this situation can snowball. And so when we take a step back and we look at this next level of impact, we see that the lack of shelters at the bus stops correlates to specific neighborhoods, and that have a high population that use the bus system, which forces a high number of people to be exposed to outdoor elements for impossible extended periods of time. And as they wait, they may also be experiencing the same situation as we highlighted before with that individual. So missing out on work, having to wait in longer weather. And so all of this is to say that this problem has been felt across the neighborhood, right? So by looking at that first individual and broadening out, we see that this is a neighborhood-wide inequity because the transportation system in this neighborhood was not and is not built to be safe, accessible, or equitable for all. And so when we look at this one last step out, we talk about the state level. This individual in their neighborhood decided to change the lack of safe bus stops. And so they created a coalition and asked others from different cities across the state to share their stories and to get involved as a way to make state level policy change, and which would mandate appropriate weather shelters for all bus stops. And so that's just an example, right, of how we can clearly see how the one individual impacted person can look around and build an advocacy coalition, advocacy space on the different levels of the who. Next slide, please. And so here we're going to talk about the how. And so there are many ways to advocate, and you get to decide what you are most comfortable with and what makes the most sense for your issue and what you're advocating. And so some of the methods include hosting a local issue forum that brings people together to amplify an issue and garner support, similar to the bus stop example. Or you can participate in a public forum, such as legislative hearings to testify orally or submit written testimony. Or you can attend your local town halls. You can use media to your advantage, whether that's letters to the editor or your legislator or representative. You can use op-eds and social media. We're seeing a massive change in the way advocacy is happening with social media and with various generations. When it's such an incredible thing to witness. And so also you can meet with your legislator one-on-one. That you can discuss issues that affect you, your neighborhood, your community, and more. And I want to share a personal example of this. So when I moved back to Connecticut after my service in the Navy, I needed some support navigating the VA system and wasn't really sure where to go or how to do it. I was, to be honest, in a bit of a panic. I was starting college and I needed that paperwork to be settled and I needed to figure it out. And I didn't know what to do. But I recently actually had signed up when I moved back to my senator and representatives newsletters that get sent out to my email. And I remember as I was combing through them, one of the highlights said, call your representatives for support with the VA. And so I called them. And long story short, I called and I was taught that they actually have specific caseworkers that help their constituents navigate federal programs such as Medicare, the IRS, the Veterans Administrative System, immigration, and many more. And so the reason why I share this is because, one, this is something I did not know. And I think it's important that we all know that these supports exist. And sometimes we get caught up on advocating for issues that we forget about, that we can also advocate for ourselves and our needs. And advocacy doesn't have to have just one layer, one way to it. And I also want to remind everyone again that it happens on so many different levels. Like I said, whether it's individual for me, but then it's advocacy also when I'm sharing that with my community and other people I know who may also need these supports, who also didn't know they existed. And so that's when we talk about that one-on-one with your legislator and what that can look like. Next slide, please. And so this is just part 2 of how we advocate. And so as I stated before, determining the issue, who is most impacted, and if you're advocating as an ally, make sure that you're in step with the groups that are directly affected by the issue. Goal setting. Set timelines and benchmarks to make sure that you're not just flying around at the seat of your pants, but also we want to make sure that we have a cohesive plan and that we're working towards our goals. But also doesn't mean that goals can't change or plans can't change. We know they do all the time, and that change is the ever constant. But it's important that by having a timeline, it helps us determine what courses of action we're working towards and where we want to be and where we're not working and how we can be better. And also coalition building, right? Partner with others. There are strengths in numbers. And within that coalition building, there is collaboration. We share resources, we support one another, and we actually build a fuller approach to an issue. My experience is not the same as Pastor Matt's, but we can both care about the same issue. And so by bringing our own examples and our own experiences into issues, we can build a holistic support and a holistic lens towards advocacy efforts. And we also want to think about utilizing storytelling as a tool. It is a powerful tool for advocacy. Numbers are helpful, but stories can be extremely impactful. And in our next workshop, we're going to really dive into kind of the storytelling aspect and talk about crafting our story and practicing and building stories for advocacy. Next slide, please. And so here we're going to talk about the where. Advocacy can happen anywhere. And there are advocates who work on a national level, pushing for federal change in DC. There are individuals and organizations working to advance statewide policy, like Health Equity Solutions, our partners, and our community members here in Hartford. There are town residents who are working to make change in their local town level through their councils, their churches, and their board of education. And town and municipal or local advocacy efforts can actually often be the most immediately felt and be implemented the quickest. So it's one of the reasons why local advocacy is and so impactful. And so advocacy has often been thought of as operating in these large scale, really traditional spaces, or informative legislative spaces. I know someone in our chat earlier mentioned lobbyists and legislation, and all of that is true. And those areas are very critical and important for advocacy, but it's not the only place that it lives. And it can be just as impactful in other non-traditional or non-formal spaces. And as mentioned before, advocacy is an action word. And so it involves speaking up and taking steps towards addressing an issue important to you. And that can happen exactly where you are right now, right after this. It can happen with family members, with friends, and with coworkers, and just your overall community. And advocating in our close community is an essential way for allies to be involved. So by following established community leaders and working to support and make the change directly where they exist, allies can play an impactful role without taking up leadership space or talking about an issue that doesn't directly affect them. Next slide, please. So here's our quick when. And so there are local and state timelines for formal advocacy and policy change. Town councils or local advocacy can often be more accessible, and their timeframes tend to have a wider policymaking window, or sometimes they're even all year round. And sometimes these spaces, while have a larger timeline, can be hard to access. And so, or even to find the schedule online. And so we always say to utilize your town clerk. They are an excellent resource for information and often can be overlooked when looking to get involved in town council or board of ed or spaces like that. And then state policy can look a little different and sometimes can be more restrictive, which depends on the state you reside in. So some states do have full year legislative sessions with smaller breaks. And in some states like Connecticut, our legislative session happens for only half the year. But you can always meet with your elected officials anytime, and actually especially outside of the legislative sessions when they tend to have a little bit more time. And so you can always keep up with them via social media or their newsletter. And you can get on their mailing list. And that also, not only do they share about, for example, the VA support program, but they also share major legislative issues and breakdowns of important information, and also where they might be holding town halls or for ways to get more involved. And also this can happen within your own organization or your site agency. And we can talk about how advocacy continues to happen in every space, but knowledge of those board meetings or those staff meetings are also really critical spaces for that advocacy and for decision-making to be supported. Next slide, please. And our final W in our advocacy formula is why. And I don't believe that anything is more important or least important, but this one I think holds a really special place. So there are no issues that are ever addressed, highlighted, or resolved without some form of advocacy. Advocacy is essential to holding policymakers, decision makers, everyone accountable, and accountability is a key pillar of social justice and equity. And you have knowledge as an advocate and expertise that policymakers do not have. We have elected policymakers to make the best decision based on resources and knowledge, but elected officials and policymakers are not experts in everything. It would be impossible to be an expert in everything that they hear. And so we need advocates, we rely on advocates to make sure that they share your experience and your expertise. You are the expert in your own experience. You are the expert in how that policy affects your everyday life and your community and your neighborhood. And that's why making your voice heard is so important. And it provides a voice and multiple mechanisms for people that have often faced the most barriers in our communities. And the most important is your fill in the blank, our fill in the blank. Why is the advocacy effort or cause important to you? This will help ground your advocacy efforts and really be your backbone. And it's critical, especially when we navigate moments and barriers in advocacy when it comes to sustainability and keeping going when it feels exhausting and hard. Next slide, please. And so, as I mentioned, we know that advocacy, while it's very important, it's important also for us to name and to recognize that even with all of the best steps, formulas, practices, it can be hard and it can be exhausting. And so while there's no maybe perfect way to sustain advocacy, these are some of the ways in which you can support yourself and build community support during your advocacy work. And so first we talk about asset or strength-based approach. And all that means is really just tapping into everyone's specific strengths and unique abilities. And every single person has an important role to play. Are you really good at emails? Are you like being on the phone? Are you good with TikTok and do you enjoy social media? Are you an excellent writer? Are you a cook or baker who can help support people in different spaces and bring people together? Do you have a car with a lot of space where you can drive items to food drives or school drives and backpack drives? Do you have free time and like to work on the phone, right? So all of that is a small list of all the different skill sets that are important to advocacy, but skills that everybody has that play such an impactful role in this work. And then also we want to name that, you want to prioritize your personal effect, your efforts. And so when we work within our community strengths, it does help us prioritize our individual actions and efforts. And we can't do everything alone. And so being able to play to our individual strengths and our community strengths allows us to prioritize our rest too. And honoring your rest is important. It's critical so that you and your community and our space can continue to advocate and push for change. And we also want to name that relying on your community is essential. Whether you're advocating for a small scale personal issue or statewide policy, having your community to support you and care for you and help you recharge is critical to the sustaining of advocacy. Next slide, please. And so now what? We've done a quick 101. We've talked about advocacy. What happens? So register to vote and vote, especially in local elections. As I mentioned, those often have the most immediate felt impact on our communities. Request to meet the legislator. You can give a public testimony. And within that testimony, you work on telling your story. You can provide important information. You can know your opponent's argument, and that helps you address certain specific issue areas. You can talk about why you care. And if they have questions, you can listen and get back to them. And all of that is to say that telling your story is so important and can really make a difference, specifically in advocacy. And then you can join a coalition. If there's one that exists, you can join that if it's an issue area you care about, or you can start one on an issue that you're passionate about. I can guarantee you're not the only person who is passionate about an issue that you are. There are other people out there who want to be involved about supporting an issue and making change. And then also you can educate in your immediate sphere of influence. You can advocate every single place you are, always, and it can look different depending on the space you're occupying. You can chat with friends and family over dinner, bring something up that they maybe didn't know that you care about. You can post something on social media from someone who is an active in their community member. You can attend a workshop or lecture. You can do things that continue to support your advocacy efforts, and continue to educate those in your immediate sphere of influence. And also, we just want to acknowledge that people, please feel free to sign up for our second workshop. We are going to really do a deep dive into storytelling. We're going to have lots of activities and really have time to kind of craft what does it feel like to build a story for advocacy. And we're really excited about that. And so our next slide real quick. And so this is just anyway, this is all the ways to find HES, Health Equity Solutions, on social media. You can text us and get involved with our newsletter. And I will drop my contact in the chat for anyone. But this is just a quick way for anyone that wants to follow us on all the social medias that we have. Please feel free at any time. And so I want to thank you for being a part of this 101 workshop, and I will pass it back to Kristen.
Taylor, thank you so much for that great overview of advocacy. I'm sure that our community members have learned so much in just a half hour of time. We're going to ask that you stay on so that we can ask you questions at the end, so don't disappear on us. But we are now going to hear from Pastor Wayne Mack, who will share how his church has engaged in advocacy. So his church worked in partnership with the National Coalition of 100 Black Women, Mega Chapter, the Conference of National Black Churches, and Walgreens to host a pop-up vaccine clinic to administer COVID-19 and flu vaccines. And notably, they invited local legislators to the vaccine clinic, bridging the gap between a faith-based organization and local government. So I hope I'm not stealing your shine yet, Pastor Mack, but can you tell us more about the work that you have done at Grace Place?
Okay, very well. I must say that I was not very concerned about the virus, especially when it was called coronavirus, until I watched a documentary that my wife was just happened to be looking at one Saturday, and I really just wanted to say, will you turn that morbid mess off? And this was back in like February of 2020. And about 9 minutes in, and then 20 minutes in, I was sold. I says, this virus, whatever is happening now, even though that was the 1918 Spanish flu, I says, oh my goodness, I believe that what we're hearing going on in Wuhan is coming to America. And that's when I started to move into action. I felt very, very compelled that that was going to happen. So as a result of that, I started doing a number of things to advocate for people waking up to the fact that something is coming. I don't know what it is, but it's coming. And during the time I was working on a sermon series called Closed on Sunday. That was kind of I don't know, premonition of mine, so to speak. But anyways, I started preaching around that. And then all of my messages turned towards the what I would call the pandemic that I thought was coming, although no cases had been actually identified in America. After watching the documentary, I started to share my thoughts with my church and sharing it everywhere that I could go. I even made little tickets that I was handing out saying, watch this 1918 flu. This is coming to America in the sense of a coronavirus. And so invariably it did. My congregation was more fortified, I think, through just building trust with them. They trusted me on this. I started to show them other clips of other things that were put out as the virus came to America. But nevertheless, I'm a little bit scrambly now, but nevertheless, advocacy started when I felt very strongly that something very real was going to be occurring.
And it sounds like you were very early in sounding off the alarm, so to speak, on the virus itself. So how did you, I guess, take what no one was talking about yet, or just starting to talk about yet, and really get it to sink in with your?
Wow, that's a great question. I have to give so much credit to watching that 1918 Spanish flu. And I'm telling you, I just felt this impression upon me. I even called our denominational leader and says, man, I think something's coming. I don't know. And he even said, well, what do you see? I said, I don't know. I just got this little bit of a premonition and started to just spread the news, says, watch this. And folks started watching it. I says, it's not going to be another snow day in Atlanta. I can tell you that. This is going to last more than 2 weeks. And at the time, this was February, and I'm saying if it comes, it'll probably take us through Thanksgiving and beyond. So by that time, the news started to hit, and I would be in the store and I'd be handing out my tickets. It says, watch this, watch this. I says, listen, you're going to need more than potato chips to get you through this one and soup. And folks would look at me and say, what are you talking about? And then others did watch it and called me back, especially on my job, and says, wow, there's something to this. And so as a result of just kind of pushing that, and then again, my congregation, having high trust with them, they bought into it, very reluctant. The good thing is we had nobody who pushed back. Even if they were reluctant about it, they didn't push back. We moved to, trying to engage legislators later on after, we were really in the thick of this whole pandemic deal. And I was reluctant to engage with legislators. I was just not that real keen on doing that because I thought it was just going to be another grandstanding photo op for them. But then as, we started to find more or less a vaccination for this, we did a pop-up event. And it just became too overwhelming of that. Legislators were coming and dignitaries were coming. And I'm like, I don't really want them to come. But I can tell you, they came with a very good spirit. And I was very, very shocked. It was more than a photo op. They really partnered with us. They came, they were partly invisible. Their goal was to just really, blend in and be a part of the event. And we're in a very, very touch and go community because we have a lot of undocumented workers, and I felt legislators are going to chase them off, but they blended in, and it was a very, very good event, if I can say it like that.
So you talked a bit about the pop-up clinic. You talk about how you started to develop that. How did you get your church to be a site for it? How did you get buy-in from your congregants, and how did you get them involved in this effort?
Great question. I keep going back to the same theme of high trust, and just some of the things that it was the messages around the pandemic. I'm trying to make this leap from like February, when I was just starting to push the message that something is coming, to it actually happening. And during that time, probably by the time we got to March, this whole virus thing was very, very real. We were still in church and meeting, and then I could just feel, the pressure of this coming. So I started to show a few other clips that had been, I think, introduced by CDC that just gave some very straightforward information about the virus. I was exposing my congregation to that. And then we made that leap to going totally virtual within 2 weeks or so of us just saying, we need to start thinking about what's going to happen down the road. From that, I think during our virtual services, we had an after church chat every Sunday. But I can also tell you that during the whole 2 years of the virus, all of my messages were around the pandemic, every one of them. And after church, I'm telling you, folks showed up. And after church, we would have an after church chat. And most of the chat basically focused on the virus, the pandemic. Our folks, we got full buy-in. And from there, we started doing webinars at our church. We're really thankful for Benita McBride, who attends our church, who has given us credible information. She conducted some of the webinars. We had Healthy Thursdays. We had Nurse Bryn at our church, who was really giving us what was happening in the hospitals. It was just really credible information. And our congregation, they bought in. I don't know, even if we had folks who were reluctant to buy in, nevertheless, they never showed their cards. Everybody kept a very positive attitude about it, because so much of what we were saying at the time, I think, boded with them. And here's what really happened. We balanced science with scripture. And that was undeniable to our congregation. We even rolled in history with it in terms of smallpox that many of us had experienced during that time, polio, the syphilis experienced in Tuskegee, all of that. We rolled it together to start to alleviate all the crazies that people were running after and said, let's remain sober on this. This is very, very real. And our congregation embraced that message. And because it was sober, I think it really helped us to do good things amongst ourselves and then our community.
You're hitting on a point that we talk a lot about in the learning community, and that's having trusted people in the community to relay this medical information. So I have a question for you. So you're based in Atlanta, right? Which we know is right near the CDC. Do you think that being near the CDC geographically conferred any type of advantage in getting out the message of the seriousness of the virus and the need for vaccines?
I wish I could say yes. I think our best weapon was, I hate to keep saying this, but Benita Harris McBride, who just, she knows my heart and knew what I was trying to do. And she just laid it down flat and raw for us. There were so many conflicting messages. I'm telling you, coming from government, that our folks, the goal was to let's stay away from the crazies. Let's really remain very, very sober about this. And thank God for CDC. And I think they did their best to convey credible information. We took what they were putting out, but then we customized it to our own folks, into our own environment, into what we believed that we could do in our community. And it worked. 90% of our folks were vaccinated. We didn't experience any deaths. They really took the virus seriously.
That's awesome. So getting back, I guess, to the vaccine clinic that your church hosted, and you said you invited local legislators, and you talked about you didn't want it to be a photo op. How did you manage to get it to not just be a photo op? How did you get them to be partners in it? I guess seen but not heard, or heard, or they were hearing you and not just there for the news article?
Well, I'm gonna dress this up because I'm gonna tell you, I was totally reluctant to engage them, totally opposed, even as we understood that we have an opportunity to do a pop-up event for our community, super excited about it. But then, man, I started getting calls from legislators and stuff. And, my background is PR, and I know what that's all about. Even one called and says, what do you think the best time for us to come is? And I wanted to hang up on them. I really did, because I'm like, this is about the community. And I'm in a community that's already tough enough to sell on this. And you're asking me this, and I'm like, but let me tell you something, I was wrong. And I would say to anyone, hear their hearts, because that's what I had to end up doing, taking a step back. I had to hear their hearts and give them a fair hearing, all of the legislators. And so I found that, they really do care. Every one of them that showed up, they didn't come for really a photo op. Because I heard their hearts, and I realized that, those legislators, they care. They cared enough. And normally I don't brag on them like this, but I'm going to tell you, I found that they bring resources, they have connections, they have influence, they have information, they even have money, some of them, but for the most part, they came, I think, with honesty and decency, really concerned about the community. And the county that I'm in, it had a high resistance to taking the vaccine. And those legislators knew that. And they says, man, we got a responsibility here. We want to support what you're doing. So whatever we can do to help people get here, we're in. And let me tell you something, we were so blessed. I will not push back again. Next event we have, I'm going to roll out the red carpet, so to speak. They'll be there, but they blended in. And so nobody even knew that they were there, honestly.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
And even one of them actually got the shot. It was time for their booster, and they got boosted.
So they knew Grace Place was the place to get their booster shot. That's
yes.
Awesome.
And we're really proud of that. Really proud.
So given these relationships and this trust that you've now started to build with your legislators, how are you making advocacy a long-term effort rather than this one-off vaccine clinic? So how are you you have any plans to engage with them again?
We do, in fact, and so the big deal is creating an environment where they just blend in, and so we feel like we can have many more events, and so it's about again educating our congregation that hey, we want to have many multiple events because we're here for the community. And as a result of that, we have great buy-in from the community. We have many things going, or at least even in our first pop-up, lots going on our campus, a clothing drive, a food closet, because we really wanted folks who came and went up to the strip stores and door to door and getting folks to come out. When they showed up on our campus, they found that it was a place of high trust. And so we don't want this to be a one-off event. And so we want to keep members, one, very, very sober about how real the virus and its variants are. And so it just didn't end, when you got the shot or you got boosted. Let's continue to look at the information. So we continue to lay the information and we continue to do that daily. It's very real. I mean, keeping them with this understanding that, again, doesn't matter what we're hearing in the media. There's a little bit of a spin. I don't want to appear to be too terribly reluctant. And here's the message. Let's not get into the crazies, but let's remain sober. And as a result of that, our congregation still believes that the virus is very, very real. And so again, using those historical examples where we don't dismiss what is going on by erroneously applying some historical things that have happened, especially to people of color, about, how we've been hijacked and things, but let's stay really, really sober about this. We've still got much, much, much work to do. And you know what? We're blessed to do this work. And so this won't be a one-off. We are looking for more opportunities and expecting to do the bivariant that's coming out. We want to do something in the fall for that. So we're starting to talk about that already.
Pastor Mac, I gotta say, I love your story because you're highlighting the importance of having knowledgeable, trusted people in the community with influence to bring about change in that community. And also you're highlighting the importance of building relationships across different organizations with government and how by working together, you can do more. My grandfather used to say, do better together. So I'm just really glad to hear that description. We do want to be cognizant of time, so I do want to bring Taylor back so that we can open up the Q&A. So if anybody has any questions or that you would like to ask either Taylor, Mr. Tucker, or Pastor Mac, feel free to put them in the Q&A and I'll ask them. So it is now open if you would like. In the meantime, I'll sneak in another question. So I'll ask this to Taylor first. So what is one thing that you want the audience to take away from today's conversation?
Yeah, absolutely. And Pastor Mac, thank you so much. I was scribbling notes and all of the different things. I think the one thing is that advocacy can happen regardless of what the formality of it looks like. And then I think just this idea that advocacy and change happen exactly where you are and can also happen in every space, right? But they start with you. And we talk so much about making change where you are because we often, I think, are told that we have to get caught up in this big, proven formal change when that's not true, right? We see change happen every day with the people that we support and care for and love in different various relationships. And so I think I really hope people take away that advocacy can look different, but it can be impactful and happen exactly right now after this call or even during this call.
That's awesome. Pastor Mac, I'm gonna pose the same question to you. What do you think is the one takeaway that you would like people to walk away from this with?
I hope there's some pastors on this line, and I would say to them to defend against misinformation and distrust. I think that was one of our greatest launching pads, besides some of the other things that we did. And as Taylor's already said, man, there are so many available resources out there. Take advantage of them. If nothing else, get yourself educated up, strain out all of the misinformation, and trudge forward.
Great. So I see another question. Do you think that one form of advocacy is better than another? So is written testimony better, oral testimony? Do I write an op-ed? Do I table? Do I scream outside the grocery store? How,
Wow.
what's the best way? Or is there a best way?
I'm going to jump in because Taylor's going to steal my thunder. He's already said it, so I'm going to echo what he said, and that's storytelling. And, it's not just my story to be told in my congregation. I'm the biggest mouth, but I've found that honestly, I kept talking about building trust. It's when our other members have told their stories that has been so spot on, because it has blessed me, but it's blessed a lot of other folks because folks can relate to what other folks are saying because they see in that their own trepidation, their own reluctance. When you hear people tell their stories, says, "Oh, that's me. I was in that same place." But when folks tell stories, it's so humanizing. It brings us right to where we are. So I think even one-on-one small groups for us at our church using our chat features to just tell the stories, man.
Thank you so much, Taylor. You look like you're going to jump in there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, storytelling through and through, that human aspect, that thread is really, really critical. And it can go across organization lines. I mean, it crosses every line, right? Because we do share all the same emotions on different levels. And it's so critical. And I would also say to think about your audience. Because it can change based on who you are working to reach and what your ultimate goal is. And I say that because there might be a space where we've seen it, right? Gen Z, like they are incredible on social media. There is no way around that. Their social media advocacy has changed the game. And some of it is super based in storytelling, and some of it is based on sharing fact sheets, sharing information, digestible facts that people can latch onto and be like, oh, I didn't know this. Now I can look up more and get more interested. So I would say storytelling for sure. And then also just this idea of expansion and knowledge of your audience.
Awesome. And also put in a plug that you will be hosting the storytelling advocacy workshop next week. We do have another question in the chat. It says, what do you recommend for advocacy when your policy makers are completely on the other side of the issue and don't support the legislation that you want, or supports legislation that harms what you want? That was a deep one.
Well, again, here I am. I'm balancing scripture with science, and as far as I'm concerned, the Bible answers everything. And I'm going to tell you, I'll just use a story very quickly, is to tell that all of my sermon series for 2 years, or almost 2.5, a little bit over, anyways, have just really addressed the pandemic. And one of the first sermon series, at least an Easter message, was, whose report are you going to believe? And I use that to sort of differentiate between what is sober thinking and what is this agenda that so many of even our politicians and government is trying to promote. Take a step back, be very, very sober, you weigh the evidence.
That's great. I have another question in chat. I'll let this be the last question. It's directed to Taylor, and it says, what recommendations do you have for initial outreach to policymakers on a local level? How do you suggest starting a conversation versus expecting immediate action and policy change?
Absolutely. And so I want to start this by saying, it's easy to feel, I think, that binary of like good or bad, right? Like good or bad, they have to start policy right away, this and this. And it's not to say that that's not true. And I also think it's important that we, for right or wrong, have expectations that sometimes policy is a long haul game. And that's how we talk about sustaining. And sometimes it can get done immediately. And part of that is whether or not the legislator is really hearing you, right? Part of it is like what's going on behind spaces that we know are not accessible. And that's an important thing I think we also need to uplift and highlight, is that the system is not bent or built on equity or accessibility. And so some of the things that we are talking about, like the fact that you find a town council, I know if I were to Google my town council, it is really hard to find when they meet and where, and also which ones are open or which ones not. That's a really hard thing to do. And so when we shared out talking to your town clerk, we're trying to think about all these other resources that we already have built in, that we can get that information easily. And so that's the first thing I just want to mention is there are some times that policy is a really long haul, and sustaining it is really critical, and sustaining it in ways that feel good to you and your community and being able to shift and adapt is important. And so I think for the initial outreach is use the various mechanisms, right? Find out, are you signing up for their emails? Are you able to attend public forums? Are you seeing their live Instagram videos or their Facebook videos? Where are they at in the community, right? That kind of gives you the sense of maybe a little bit, as Dr. Max talked, like where they are and kind of that little bit of PR, but it also gives you an insight to kind of what's happening and what's taking their attention. And that allows you to kind of see kind of where you can find them, what that looks like. And I also talk a lot about is like making sure that you are in touch with either their, if it's state, maybe their aides, or if it's federal, their aides, because they're also going to be the people that can directly connect you, which will be helpful. And then asking for a town hall, right? Asking for a meeting, right? Sometimes it might take one or more times to set up that meeting. And it can be really frustrating, but there are moments where like they will show up and they want to be in a meeting. They do, because they also know that they can't get elected without you. Like they can't get elected without voters. And so part of that is that conversation around asking direct questions, right? If you are trying to start a conversation, ask about policies that matter to you, ask about what's happening, and try really hard not to put a blame or shame in that moment. Try to talk about ways in which, like, I've read this. Can you tell me what's happening with it? Can you tell me where I can get more information on this? And I also think, you know, Pastor Max talked about it, I think beautifully, is this idea of relationships across organizations, relationships around coalitions and collaboration, because maybe I can't get through, but Kristen, maybe you can get through. Maybe you have someone that you know that's already working with that legislator, and how can I join that cause? And also, you know, work to talk about something else I'm concerned about or have an issue with that I know also you might have an issue and want to stand up for. So really leveraging those relationships and working within communities of trust. Because most places, whether they're grassroots organizations or nonprofits or state agencies, they have a connection to some legislator. And so kind of, you know, just learning about where they're operating is super helpful.
Well, gentlemen, I thank you so much for joining our learning community today. I know that they have learned so much. So I'm just really happy that you all are here today. Before we head out, I would like to just put up a brief satisfaction poll. This helps us to understand what events we should be hosting and what we should be doing. Again, I want to highlight that Taylor will be back next week to lead our workshop. So we'll do a more in-depth, interactive workshop about advocacy through storytelling. And also, we do have the social media workshop series going on this month. There's currently a wait list for next week's event. So if you'd like to join the wait list, please email Vax Equity Learning to be put on the wait list. We do also want to let you know that new event materials are available. So we do record each of our webinars and put the slides up in the community library on our virtual platform. So the event from Monday, Coverage Matters, Understanding and Connecting Community Members to Affordable Health Insurance, is up and available on the website now. And as always, full event calendar is available on the website. Please be in tune so that you can know about all of our upcoming events. So have a great day, everybody. Thank you for joining us today.